Mighty Number 9 is the spiritual successor to the Mega Man franchise, but so far it's shaping up to be one of the biggest disappointments in 2016 to no one's surprise. While Mighty Number 9 is an outright and awful game, many backers and consumers alike felt ripped off, and it's easy to see why, with Mighty Number 9 being one of the few Kickstarter-backed Goliaths promising to bring back the gaming of yore. Developed by Concept and Inti Creates, the game's basic premise is simple: jump, shoot, and dash through stages to defeat the boss and acquire his or her ability. The basics fittingly copy the Mega Man franchise backbone, though now there's more emphasis on scores, as dashing lets you assimilate enemies with low health. Not only does it benefit the player's score, but it also gives the player bonus firepower, speed, defense, and health tank charges. This system not only keeps Mighty Number 9 from being similar to Mega Man's jump and shoot mechanic, but also keeps its combat and platforming fast-paced. Assimilating enemy bots may take a classic fan a while to get used to, but once performed flawlessly, it shows the game at its highest peak. Sadly, it's bogged down by its lack of polish. Mega Man was a franchise that valued its gameplay over its story. Though the X series would start bringing the franchise into a more narrative-driven game, it still focused more on its gameplay. Mighty Number 9 would keep X's tradition narrative-wise, bringing the story up front rather than in the intro, but its subpar English voice acting drags down the plot that was already trite. Momentum-stopping scripted dialogue scenes may be skippable, but retains its annoying nature as it does force the player to stop and listen to more trite banter between characters. Cutscenes are relegated to stills of the characters' 3D models, which looks awkward and cheap. It was understandable why the classic series wouldn't involve much animation till the franchise's more recent games, but with Mighty Number 9's budget, there was no excuse for these cutscenes to feel cheap and tacked on. Great mechanics can only carry a game so much without good level design, and though Mighty Number 9 isn't Mega Man in base when it comes to cheap enemy placements, its assimilating mechanic doesn't complement most of the enemy placements, especially when it comes to the non-scrolling encounters. This keeps the mechanic from being constantly satisfying, as taking damage can stop momentum instantaneously. Enemies also seem to be bullet sponges if the player chooses not to assimilate, which helps enforce the mechanic but puts a player at an unfair disadvantage, especially when enemies and projectiles make up most of the screen. This overall lack of gameplay polish makes it seem as if the developers took direct inspiration from the classic Mega Man, yet failed to acknowledge the assimilation mechanic. Abilities back gains from bosses seem to be downplayed, as most of these abilities barely give the player any incentive if used. Even in boss fights, abilities are no more as rewarding as using Beck's stock weapon. The art style, though now outright terrible, is subpar at best. Not as memorable, yet not eye-gougingly horrible. The 3D models of Beck and enemies can feel a bit disconnected with the background at times, and also looking closer in screenshots showed the lack of fidelity most of these models have. The game's soundtrack is lackluster overall, as it only seemed to showcase the bare minimum of what action platformers should have on their soundtracks. Even with the game hitting bare minimum within the graphics department, the game itself suffers from frame drops and crashes, which turns the game into an outright unplayable mess to some players. Mighty Number 9 had all of its tools under its disposal. Backed by a very successful Kickstarter campaign and a development time stretched way out of its promised due date, it's surprising to see what an unpolished mess this game has become. The game's shortcomings could have been avoided by simply looking outside of its own box, as its developers clearly wanted to rekindle Mega Man at its height while trying to give Mighty Number 9 an identity of its own. Rather than showcasing why Mighty Number 9 is the rightful torchbearer of a dead franchise, it ended up achieving nothing, unlike other classic throwback games such as Axiom Verge, Shovel Knight, and La Mulana. Thankfully, Bloodstained and Yooka-Laylee is looking far more promising than Mighty Number 9, though this game is a healthy reminder to think past the hype.